Was Cliff Burton overrated? Let's talk about it. When you are going to assess a bass player's abilities and contribution to a band, it can be one of the trickiest things. It's not the same as evaluating a singer or a lead guitarist, and there are as many different types of bass players and approaches to playing the bass as you can imagine. So one of the things with Cliff Burton is you have to decide whether or not he was overrated, is you have to weigh the evaluation of his playing against the perception of his playing. In other words, you got to find what is the perception of his greatness and where does greatness lie in actuality, and do they match? So Cliff is one of the few bass players that has a legendary status, even though he wasn't a primary songwriter, he wasn't a vocalist, and he wasn't a particularly flashy player. One of the reasons why he might have made noise early on is because of his tragic death. But even had he not died, his bass playing, his personality, and his image would still be discussed at large. He would be a superstar right along with James, Kirk, and Lars, because he had the kind of charisma, even though he was a quiet persona, to command that kind of fan love, and he had a strong personal identity within the band, and he melded with the other guys in a perfect harmony. So he would have been a star even had his death not brought him all of this, added recognition. The question is, does he deserve being a star, or is it just hype? So if you go back to the very first Metallica album, Kill 'Em All, and start listening to it from the very first track, you won't hear a lot of bass come leaping up out of the mix at you. What you will hear from the very beginning is how incredibly precise of a player that Cliff Burton really was. In other words, he's one of these bass players that prioritizes locking in with the drums. Now, this video isn't about Lars, but Cliff's contribution to Lars's overall sound on the early Metallica albums simply cannot be overemphasized. He is locked in so tight with Lars that it's actually giving Lars a boost. And this is the place you have to start when you want to discuss Cliff Burton's bass playing. He is the type of player who is a locked-in bass player. Now, this works slightly against the public perception because of the anesthesia bass solo that made it seem like he was this raging wah-wah effect crazy lead bass player, when in actuality his true talent is in locking him with the band, which is apparent on song after song after song after song. The first thing, if you listen to something like Four Horsemen, he has this great counterpoint that he does occasionally, like ascending or descending counterpoint on the bass, but he times those in a way to really push the song. A lot of times he's doing it underneath the guitar solo, but these are the kind of moves that he makes that makes him a special bass player from a musical point of view. But from a strictly bass player point of view, it's his ability to just lock in with the band itself that pushes him over the top. His tone is very tasty, and it is also designed to blend in with the band, and he's fighting against something very difficult in Metallica, which is the bottom end's really crowded in that band. You've got the guitar thumping on the open E string most of the time, you've got a double bass drum going, you've got a ton of low end sound, and you've got to find a way to make the bass contribute something to that, not just add to the lower register like so many metal bassists actually do, but you got to make the bass do something within that very narrow sound parameter. And what Cliff was able to do was say, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to lift the lower ranges around me with my bass. I'm not going to fight with them. I'm going to use the bass to accentuate certain aspects of the low end attack. And to do that, he becomes much more of a pocket bass player. He's much more like a Mick Fleetwood than he is a Steve Harris, and this is where it gets real elusive in judging his bass abilities. Now, in addition to his incredible musicality, he had a great persona. He was one of those bass players that accepted his role as a sideman in the band. He did a lot of the thrashing and headbanging, and his really long hair made it like eye-catching, and he had stage moves. He also had a great look, and so he did contribute in all these additional ways to the band. He also brought a arrangement style to the band, particularly with their ballady type stuff that James has been feeding on for years after that. He brought certain understandings of chord progressions and counterpoint melody, like I mentioned before, that helped Metallica flesh out their sound. So as a actual technician and bass player, I think the key to understanding him is that he is a pocket bass player who's looking to embellish the sound of the band. He has very interesting choices of notes, but he doesn't overplay. He's not fighting against the guitars, and he's not trying to be a virtuoso. My final verdict on Cliff is I think he was a great bass player. I think he was the perfect bass player for Metallica. I don't think that Metallica ever sounded quite the same or quite right after he was gone, and I think that the main reason for that is because he was ability to slip the bass notes into the exact right point every single time gave Metallica a bounce and a structure that without it they sort of either get too stiff or they get too loose. It's very hard to keep them on that golden path that makes for their best songs, and I think that Cliff had a knack for keeping them on that golden path for Metallica, and I also believe that he did a great job with just being a band member. He had the right chemistry, he had the right look, he had the right persona, and so I believe that Cliff Burton was not overrated. In fact, he may be an underrated if you're just talking about metal bass players. So that's what I think. If you have a thought about this or any other topic connected to classic or contemporary music, please comment in the section below. Remember to like and subscribe. Thanks a lot.